The border dispute between India and China is one of the longest-standing and most intense in modern geopolitics, rooted in more than just territorial boundaries. It also involves issues of identity, security, and regional power. It all began in 1959 when China solidified its control over Tibet, heightening tensions with India. That same year, the Tibetan uprising against Chinese occupation ended with Beijing's brutal crackdown, forcing the Dalai Lama, Tibet's spiritual leader, to flee to India, where he found asylum and support. This gesture by India was seen by China as a direct affront and a challenge to its sovereignty over Tibet, sparking tensions that would shape relations between the two countries for decades. Tensions over Tibet culminated in the 1962 Sino-Indian War, which, in just a month of intense fighting, left thousands dead and redefined territorial control in the region. The war resulted in China solidifying its hold over Aksai Chin, a strategically significant territory in the westernmost part of the Himalayas. Aksai Chin connects Xinjiang province to Tibet through the G219 National Highway, vital for China's military and logistical movements in the region. For India, the loss of this territory was a blow that reinforced the perception of a strategic threat posed by China, solidifying a dispute that would become a focal point of Indian defense policy. Over the decades, this rivalry has oscillated between moments of diplomatic negotiations and violent confrontations, particularly in border regions such as Doklam, where, in 2017, Indian and Chinese troops clashed to prevent China from building roads that could threaten the strategic Siliguri corridor, a crucial area connecting northeastern India to the rest of the country. In 2020, in the Galwan Valley, tensions again erupted into direct conflict, with hand-to-hand combat leading to casualties on both sides, something that hadn't occurred for over 40 years. This ongoing struggle reflects how the territorial dispute between India and China goes beyond a mere borderline. It is a strategic game of power and influence in Asia that involves territorial claims, cultural influence, geopolitical clout, and national identity. Both India and China have invested massively in cutting-edge technology, yet each follows a distinct path in its digital development. China has advanced in areas such as artificial intelligence, surveillance technology, and cloud computing, with a sharp focus on digital monitoring systems that are part of its smart city initiatives. These surveillance systems, integrated with AI, enable China to monitor data closely and maintain strict control over its population, while also exporting this technology to other countries. India, on the other hand, has concentrated its efforts on digital inclusion initiatives, such as the Digital India program, aimed at bringing connectivity, digital education, and government services to rural and low-income communities. However, the increasing reliance on technology has intensified cybersecurity concerns as well. India is wary of Chinese apps and telecommunications infrastructure, such as Huawei, due to espionage risks and the possibility that strategic information could be accessed by Beijing. In response, the Indian government banned more than 200 Chinese apps in 2020, including popular platforms like TikTok and WeChat, marking a new arena of competition between the two powers. This move aims to protect sensitive data and reduce China's digital influence in India while promoting local alternatives and partnerships with Western companies. To understand the complex India-China dispute, we must consider the historical roots and the colonial legacy that shaped their borders. During the colonial period, the Indian subcontinent was under British control, and many of the borders that now separate India and China were drawn without regard for complex cultural and regional dynamics. British control over India began in the 17th century, when the British East India Company established trading posts along India's coasts. Over time, the company consolidated political and military power, exploiting divisions between Indian kingdoms and forming alliances with local leaders. In 1857, following a major popular uprising known as the Indian Rebellion of 1857, the British government dissolved the East India Company and took direct control of India, instituting the British Raj. Under British rule, India became a critical colony for the British Empire, providing valuable raw materials and a vast consumer market. British colonialism established treaties and boundaries that were often not accepted by either China or India and, in many cases, were not clearly defined. This uncertainty created a contested and challenging border that continues to fuel tension between the two powers today. One of the most emblematic examples is the McMahon Line, a border drawn in the 1914 Simla Accord between British India and Tibet. The agreement was meant to resolve border disputes in northeastern India, but it was never fully recognized by China, which argues that Tibet lacked the autonomy to sign international treaties. This historical disagreement has become a central point of tension in the Arunachal Pradesh region, where China claims territories administered by India, calling the area South Tibet. These borders are therefore a colonial legacy that India recognizes but that China considers illegitimate, creating a long-standing dispute that is extremely difficult to resolve. Additionally, the issue of Tibet adds a layer of cultural and geopolitical sensitivity to the dispute. Tibet is a region of deep cultural importance, particularly for India, where Tibetan Buddhism is widely respected and the Dalai Lama, exiled in India since 1959, is a figure of prestige and reverence. For China, control over Tibet is not only a territorial matter but also one of national security, as the region serves as a natural barrier and a strategic control point over the water resources that supply much of Asia. By exercising tight control over Tibet and imposing policies of cultural repression, China seeks to consolidate its authority, while India views this repression as an attack on shared cultural values and identities. With a history of poorly defined borders and a rivalry involving cultural and geopolitical issues, the territorial dispute between India and China has resulted in one of the most contentious and prolonged borders in the world. Stretching thousands of kilometers across the Himalayas, this border is marked by harsh, strategic terrain where the two nations vie for areas of great symbolic and military value. The dispute centers on two main regions. The first is Aksai Chin, an area in the far northwest, under Chinese control since the 1962 Sino-Indian War. For China, this region is crucial as it houses the G219 National Highway, which connects Xinjiang to Tibet and allows for strategic military mobility. However, India claims Aksai Chin as part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir and views this occupation as an affront to its sovereignty. Another point of contention in this area is the Trans-Karakoram Tract, a territory ceded by Pakistan to China in 1963. India has never recognized this concession, considering it part of its territory, which further complicates relations in the region. The second area of conflict is Arunachal Pradesh, a region in northeastern India that China claims as part of South Tibet or Zhongnan. This area is recognized by India as a sovereign state, but China considers it historically tied to Tibet and therefore under its legitimate administration. For India, Arunachal Pradesh is vital due to its proximity to the Siliguri Corridor, a strategic passage that connects central India to its northeastern states. These territorial disputes become even more complex when considering their broader geopolitical implications. China's control over Tibet is not limited to territorial dominance. It gives Beijing a significant strategic advantage over India. Tibet is the source of several rivers that supply India and other Asian countries, including the Brahmaputra, one of India's largest and most important rivers. By having the power to build dams and alter the course of these rivers, China holds indirect control over India's water resources, a powerful tool that can impact water supply and even food security in regions along the border. In addition to its control over Tibet, India is also concerned about the growing alliance between China and Pakistan. Ties between these countries have strengthened over recent decades, especially with the creation of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which passes through the Kashmir region, an area claimed by both India and Pakistan. This cooperation between China and Pakistan increases China's military and economic presence near India's borders, which New Delhi views as a direct threat to its national security. One particularly vulnerable area for India is the Siliguri Corridor, a narrow strip of land connecting central India to the country's northeast. Also known as the Chicken's Neck, this passage is essential for transportation and communication between mainland India and its northeastern states. Any interference in this area could isolate this region from the country, making its defense and control challenging. For India, the Chinese presence and influence near the Siliguri corridor heightened the pressure and increased the need for defensive strategies. Beyond its disputes with India, China has quietly expanded its territorial influence over Bhutan, a small kingdom in a highly strategic location. With approximately 750,000 inhabitants and a strict policy of neutrality, Bhutan traditionally avoids international conflicts and maintains a cautious foreign policy, prioritizing its independence. However, Bhutan's geographic location, between India and Chinese-controlled Tibet, makes it a crucial piece on the regional geopolitical board. In recent years, China has begun to claim significant areas of Bhutanese territory, totaling around 12% of the territory internationally recognized as part of Bhutan. This territorial claim is relatively recent, intensifying in 2020 when Chinese settlements and military infrastructure were observed in disputed areas. Beijing not only marked new areas under its administration but also initiated the construction of villages, roads, and military posts, consolidating its presence and increasing control over regions once occupied solely by Bhutan. These actions follow a strategy known as fait accompli, where the establishment of infrastructure solidifies permanent control and complicates any reversal of occupied territories. For Bhutan, these constructions and claims represent a violation of its territorial sovereignty and put the country in a difficult position. Historically, Bhutan has maintained a close diplomatic relationship with India, which acts as its economic and security partner, and until recently had no formal relations with China. This alliance was tested in 2017 during the Doklam Standoff, a disputed area between Bhutan and China, which is also near the Siliguri corridor, the narrow strip connecting central India to its northeastern states. At the time, Indian troops intervened to prevent China from building a military road in the area, as this development posed a threat to India's security. China's increasing pressure on Bhutan raises major concerns for India. Should China establish a permanent military and civilian presence in Bhutanese territory, it would bring Beijing dangerously close to the Siliguri corridor, a strip only 27 kilometers wide. Known as the Chicken's Neck, this corridor is vital for India. Any blockade in this area would isolate its northeastern states from the rest of the country, weakening security, communication, and transportation in the region. For Bhutan, China's actions present a difficult dilemma: maintain neutrality and contend with China's growing presence, or strengthen its ties with India, risking heightened regional tensions. Meanwhile, China is expanding its influence across the Himalayas, increasing its military and civilian presence in disputed areas and challenging regional stability. As rivalry between India and China continues to intensify, the possibility of renewed conflict over disputed territories becomes an increasing concern for both nations. From the clashes in the Galwan Valley in 2020 to the standoff in Doklam in 2017, each confrontation fuels a cycle of tension, keeping the region on high alert and elevating the risks of a larger-scale conflict. Although both India and China possess formidable armies and are nuclear powers, every movement along the border is accompanied by careful containment strategies that, however, remain vulnerable to missteps that could trigger an uncontrollable escalation. For India, this tension with China is more than a simple territorial confrontation. It is part of a broader strategic challenge: the fear of having to fight a war on two fronts. With a historically tense relationship with Pakistan to the west and territorial disputes in Jammu and Kashmir, India already faces considerable challenges in securing its western borders. In recent years, the alliance between China and Pakistan has intensified, with economic agreements and military cooperation adding to the pressure on India. This alignment between its two primary geopolitical rivals poses a real risk of a simultaneous two-front conflict, an extremely challenging situation both logistically and strategically. To prepare for this possibility, India has accelerated the modernization of its armed forces and sought to strengthen strategic alliances with other powers, such as the United States, Japan, and Australia, through the Quad. This effort aims to boost its deterrent capabilities and build a support network that can help balance power in Asia. However, maintaining peace along the line of actual control, LAC, the contested border with China, remains a delicate challenge. Minor incidents have the potential to escalate into major confrontations, and the growing military presence on both sides of the border only heightens the risk of conflict. Looking ahead, the prospects are uncertain. While diplomacy has so far prevented an open war, China's expanded presence in the region and strengthened alliance with Pakistan keep India in a state of constant vigilance. This rivalry shows no signs of de-escalating, and stability in Asia hinges on the ability of India and China to manage their differences without reaching a breaking point. Beyond its prolonged dispute with India, China maintains several other high-profile territorial conflicts that reinforce its image as a power and contribute to tension in Asia. One of the most prominent examples is the issue of Taiwan, which we've discussed before here on GlobalFlow. Although Taiwan has an independent government and has been self-administered since the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949, China considers it a rebel province and an inalienable part of its territory. This stance is a sensitive point in Chinese politics and is central to the national identity promoted by Beijing, which pressures the international community not to recognize Taiwan as an independent country. Reunification with Taiwan is one of China's long-term goals, and its growing military presence near the island is a concern both in Taiwan and among its allies, especially the United States. Another major dispute is in the South China Sea, a region with vast natural resources and one of the world's most strategic maritime routes. China claims around 90% of this area through what it calls the Nine-Line, which extends from its coast to areas close to Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia. However, this claim is contested by several countries in the region, which have their own exclusive economic zones under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. In response, China has built artificial islands equipped with military infrastructure, expanding its presence and asserting its authority over the area. This move has intensified tensions with neighboring countries and increased the military presence of Western powers like the US, which frequently conducts freedom of navigation operations to challenge Beijing's claims, as we've also covered here. In addition to these more well-known disputes, China has lesser-known yet significant territorial claims that underline its ambition to consolidate its presence on multiple fronts. One such dispute involves the Senkaku Islands, a small group of islands in the East China Sea currently administered by Japan but claimed by China, which calls them the Diaoyu Islands. Despite being uninhabited, the Senkakus have great strategic value and potential natural resources, particularly gas. The frequent presence of Chinese vessels in the area increases tensions and reinforces rivalry between the two powers, raising concerns that this dispute, while contained, could escalate into a more serious confrontation. Another claim that recently resurfaced is over Bolshoi-Usharysky Island, located on the China-Russia border along the Amur River. Despite a formal 2008 agreement dividing the island between the two countries, China has revived its full claim over the area. This move is seen as a sign that Beijing may be willing to revisit past agreements to reassert its sovereignty. Although China and Russia currently maintain a cooperative strategic relationship, this action casts doubt on the stability of previous agreements and underscores China's ambitions to extend its territorial influence, even against Russia, as we discussed in a GlobalFlow documentary on how China is emerging as a major threat to Putin's country. These lesser-known disputes illustrate the breadth of China's territorial strategy, which extends to every strategically or symbolically important point in an effort to consolidate its presence across Asia. For India, this update has a direct and alarming impact. The map reaffirms old disputes in sensitive regions like Arunachal Pradesh and Aksai Chin, territories India considers sovereign and that have already been points of direct confrontation with China. This new map, highlighting Beijing's ambitions, establishes China as the country with the most open territorial disputes in the world, a distinction that underscores both the reach of its power and the instability risk posed by these tensions. India, already in a delicate situation due to the growing alliance between China and Pakistan, sees this development as a significant challenge to its security and the balance of power in the region. For India, these claims are more than just territorial. They represent a threat to its sovereignty and border stability, especially in the northeast. The new Chinese map not only rekindles disputes between the two countries but also raises concerns about a potential escalation, forcing India to intensify efforts to protect its borders and strengthen strategic alliances, such as the Quad, with powers like the United States, Japan, and Australia. Beyond India's borders, the new map should serve as a warning to the international community about Beijing's territorial ambitions and their potential impact on Asian stability and, possibly, the global stage. Nations like the Philippines and Vietnam, which also face maritime disputes with China, are watching these developments closely. However, India finds itself at a critical juncture, confronting the prospect of a two-front conflict with China and Pakistan, and dealing with growing pressure to reinforce its defense infrastructure and deterrent capabilities. This new map released by China symbolizes more than mere lines on paper. It is a statement of Beijing's intentions, a reminder that borders and alliances in Asia are far from stable and that tensions could easily escalate. For India, this marks the beginning of an even more vigilant phase as it seeks to secure its role in Asia and protect its borders amidst regional and global pressures. At a time when Asia's future depends on the stability between these two powers, the new map is a symbol of the challenge India and China face in coexisting, and of the impact this rivalry will have on the world.